So nice to see everybody as you're coming in.
Yes, welcome everyone, and let us know as you're coming in where you're joining us from. We'd love to know where folks are joining from. Folks are joining from all over, including from Denver. So let us know if you're joining it in the chat where you are joining from, and we'll get started in just a few moments.
And if you're also in Denver, both Meico and I are having severe FOMO of not being in person at the NTEN, but we're here virtually, which is almost as good.
Jenna, thank you for kicking us off. So Jenna is joining us in Denver by way of Philly. Awesome. All right, we got other folks joining as well. Looks like lots of West Coast folks are represented. So Beth is joining us from, you're in San Jose, right?
Right, yeah,
California?
San Jose. Yeah, and I see someone from Sacramento and the Bay Area.
Yeah, I'm holding
Hawaii.
up the Southeast. Yeah, I'm joining from Atlanta. So
right.
Looks like Amanda from Tennessee is the closest person I can see so far.
I see Orlando. Shout out to Orlando. Oh, that's Maya. Oh, Philly. Philadelphia. I lived in that area. I was born in that area. So shout out to Philly.
I didn't know that. You were born in Philadelphia? I didn't know that.
Well, Atlantic City, which is close to Philly. But I lived in Philly for many years. And I have lost my Philly accent. And boy, I have not had a cheesesteak in years.
All right, Beth, so I know folks are still coming in, but I think we have a lot to cover. Are you okay with us go ahead and get started?
Oh, yeah, let's get started.
All right, so we know folks are gonna be joining us joining us more. And so looks like Jenna and Beth are going back and forth about accents. And that's perfectly okay. So as you're joining us, let us know where you're joining us from. And we would love to see that energy over in the chat. And as we do that, we're going to go ahead and get rolling. We have a lot of exciting things that we want to cover about how to make hybrid work less stressful and how to make it less of an issue that contributes to burnout. And I want to start by acknowledging the context in which we are joining, which is that we are joining this session in a hybrid way, right? And that's a reflection of the fact that we have experienced so many changes in work and in life over the last couple of years. And I know that for many of us, we've been on a seesaw of emotions, mentally and emotionally, and that's perfectly okay. So if you are exhausted now, you're tired from all the change and all the uncertainty, or maybe you found yourself feeling like that at certain points, that's perfectly valid. That's perfectly okay. And it's perfectly healthy for you to acknowledge that that is how you are feeling. That being said, we also have an opportunity with so many new tools and so many things that we're learning. We also have an opportunity to learn from those challenges and learn what we can do to make hybrid work better for us, which is what we are all excited to do today. And so with that, I'm going to give you a quick introduction and then turn over to Beth to say a little bit about herself, and then we will dive into today's conversation. So I am Meico Whitlock, founder and CEO of Mindful Techie, speaker and training on workplace wellness and digital wellness. And I work exclusively with change makers just like you on increasing well-being so that you can increase your well-doing and change in the world. Former nonprofit communications director and foodie. I believe I make the world's best vegan chili. So for folks that are interested in that, let me know in the chat. We'll make sure you get access to that recipe at the end of today's session. And Beth, turning it over to you. Who are you and what should we know about you as we get started?
Sure. Thanks, Meico. So hi, Beth Kanter here. I'm calling in from San Jose. My pronouns are she, her. I've worked in the nonprofit sector many, many decades. I won't say how many because it makes me feel old. I am an author, trainer, and facilitator. I had a front row seat at the creation of the nonprofit technology field like 25, 30 years ago, and was there, have been to every single NTC conference since the beginning. So this is maybe the first one I won't be that that's in person, that is, that I haven't been in person, but I'm here virtually. I've written 4 books, the Network Nonprofit, Measuring the Network Nonprofit, and most recently, the Smart Nonprofit, which is about artificial intelligence and how it's going to impact us. And of course, a book called The Happy Healthy Nonprofit, which is about workplace being and how change makers can kind of embrace work-life harmony. And I do a lot of facilitation of organizational retreats, teams, training of facilitators and trainers, and speaking. And I've had the pleasure of working with Meico. Gosh, we've been working together, what, 6, 7? We shouldn't say how many years.
I've actually lost count. I've lost count, but this has been like an annual tradition with NTC that we do at least one session together. So, and it's always so much fun. And we also learn as much from you as you all learn from us. And so we want to invite you as we're moving throughout to contribute in the chat. So with that being said, I see lots of people asking about the chili recipe. We'll make sure you get access to that at some point today. But as we do that, I want to do a quick warm-up exercise. Beth knows that this is one of my favorite ways to start a meeting or training. And so I'm going to invite you, if this is something that you're interested in, we're going to do just one deep intentional breath. And so I'm going to invite you just to take an upright, comfortable, seated position. If you're seated, you might choose to close your eyes or lower your gaze to slightly just in front of you if you choose to keep your eyes open. And if you're standing or lying down, just adjust the body to a position that feels good, that feels supportive, and that can allow the effortless flow of the breath in and out of the body as much as you're able to. And you might choose to place the hands palm up or palm down just above the knees. And with this breath that we're going to take, I want you to make it count, and I invite you to breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth as fully and deeply. You might even make a sound, an audible ah sound, if it feels comfortable and safe where you are. And so when you're ready, we're going to do this together if you want to join me. All right, so let's breathe in through the nose, fully and deeply, as much air as you can. And then out through the mouth. Ah. Allow the body to just settle and relax. And if you want to take a few more breaths on your own, I invite you to do so at your own pace. And if you chose to close the eyes, I invite you to open the eyes. And if you are ready, if you are warmed up, give me a yes, a ready, or a thumbs up, and we'll go ahead and get rocking and rolling here as we move forward, talking about this session on hybrid work.
Oh, that's so great. I always say that Meico's mindful warm-up is better than a Valium. And it's really great to do that if you're a speaker and you're a little nervous. So always thank you for that, Meico. So today's session, we're going to begin with some research, the latest research on hybrid workplaces and well-being. And then we're going to give you lots of practical tips that you can apply for work-life tech balance or for creating an inclusive, resilient, and hybrid workplace. So 2 norms we'd like to encourage during this session, since we are virtual, is self-care. Sitting in front of screens isn't the most healthiest activity there is. So if you need to stretch or get up, turn off your screen. I always have my water bottle. You probably can't see it because it can easily get dehydrated. So focus on self-care, attend to your own body, listen to it so you're comfortable during the session. And please, I see we're already a chatty group here. Please share your questions as we go, but also share your insights, because we, as Meico said before, we learn as much from interacting with you as we hope that you'll learn from us.
Awesome. So thank you so much for that, Beth. So one thing I want to note for folks that are, lots of folks tend to ask for templates and resources and the research. And so I'm putting 2 links on the screen for you. We'll show this again at the end for folks that are interested in that, but know that there are links to additional resources and templates for a lot of the things that we talk about today. And on the left side, I have a free work-life, tech-life balance workbook. And so if that's something that interests you, you can go to mindfultechie.com/free and you can get access to that. Again, we'll show this again at the end, but I wanted to show this up front because lots of folks asked us about this throughout. So just know that that is there. And we've also included it in the collaborative notes for folks that are looking at the collaborative notes. All right, so let's go ahead and dive in. Before we dive into solutions, we want to just level set and have a shared understanding of some of the challenges that we are dealing with when it comes to hybrid work and what makes it challenging. And so this is something that I want to share with you. And Jenna, yes, you may quote me if you would like to. Someone's asking for quoting already. Go ahead, please quote me. And so let's talk a little bit about the challenges that we're dealing with. And as we're doing this, I want you to be thinking about your biggest challenges with the hybrid workplace. And we're going to be asking you in a few moments to actually share those using a poll that we're gonna share. So top hybrid workplace challenges that we're seeing. These are just a handful of them. There are obviously more, but these are some of the ones that stand out to us. The first is uncertainty, right? So we know that the pandemic that we experienced the last couple of years has had an indelible impact on our life and work. And we know that one of the challenges has been disruption in our way of life, disruption in work, disruption in routines. And over the short term, this is something that we deal with very well, but over the long term, it has a negative impact on us mentally and emotionally, and also when it comes to our ability to just show up and to be productive and to be fully present. And so we have moved into an era where uncertainty has become the norm, right? And so how do we deal with that? And so we're going to hopefully share some strategies that might be able to support you with that. There's also the collaboration and technology overload piece. I know for many of us, we may be working in organizations that had to do a lot of quick work to adjust to working in an all hybrid or remote way, or figuring out how do we work differently to meet the mission, to serve the members, to serve our clients. And that has meant that, for example, our time that we spend in front of screens has skyrocketed. It means that the number of tools that we are using to stay connected and productive and collaborative has also skyrocketed. And many of us are probably exhausted by all of those things, right? Exhausted by all the screen time, exhausted by all the tools. And so there's an overload that we're experiencing. Work-life balance, or really the lack thereof. I'm not sure that there's much more I need to say about this. I'm pretty sure we all perhaps have had this idea, this feeling that work and life are sort of blurred together, and it seems like it's sometimes hard to really tease those two apart. But that continues to be an ongoing challenge even before the pandemic that has further been exacerbated by the era that we're living in. And then the final thing that I would say about this is this concept of hypercomplexity, or what journalist Thomas Friedman talks about as the age of acceleration, which is an acknowledgement that the pace of change is picking up, and it's not your imagination, right? Technology and the speed of technological changes is picking up. Changes in political and economic systems are changing as well. But we are finite, right? We're not automatons, we're not robots. We have a finite amount of time and energy and resource. And so it is a fool's errand for us to try to keep up with this pace of change. But what do, right? How do we make decisions strategically and mindfully about how do we direct our time, energy, and resource if we're not able to keep up with all the changes that are going to continue to happen regardless? So with that being said, I would love to hear what you are dealing with. Beth and I would love to hear from you. So we put together a poll for you. And so if you have a mobile device, you can open the camera app on your phone, scan the QR code on the screen. And if you are prompted for an event code, that event code is hybrid work. And you can also pop open a web browser if you would like. Pop open a web browser, hop over to slido.com, type in the event code hybrid work if you are prompted for one, and give us 2 to 3 words that describe what your top hybrid workplace challenge is right now. And Beth, while people are filling this in, I see that you're over in the chat. Anything interesting happening in the chat while folks are filling in the poll?
Oh, sure. Somebody brought up the concept of, from the Surgeon General's office, workplace mental health framework, that work-life balance is framed as work-life harmony, which is a great concept, right? Because it's always hard. We'll never balance, right? But we integrate in a harmonious way. The work cloud's looking interesting, huh? Connection.
Yes.
We're going to talk about that too. Social connection and the need to rebuild social capital.
Absolutely. And one thing I want to know about this, so we're building what's called a word cloud. So for folks that are not familiar with word clouds, what happens is the bigger the words appear, that means the more that particular theme is resonating with us, the more that particular set of words has been mentioned. And So we do want to share that. And it looks like, I think Beth, someone's asking for the link to the Surgeon General's report you were talking about.
Yeah. I'll
So,
drop it in.
yeah.
I'll drop it in as we
Okay.
go. That
Okay.
was,
Awesome.
I was actually starting to Google it, but
Okay.
I got
Yes.
distracted and lack of focus
Yes.
also came up.
So if someone wants to Google it for us to put it in the chat or the collaborative notes, we would appreciate you for that. But lack of accountability, I'm curious to know more about that. Lack of focus, right? Lots of distractions, too much sitting. Yes, too much sitting. And Beth, you and I think we were just talking about that with Stacy before today's session. Connection, siloed teams. Yes.
Yeah, and siloed workers too, the kind of loneliness.
Yes.
And I think the fact that we're working in hybrid or remote as distributed teams, that really reinforces silos, and silos are not great.
Yes.
Because they become barriers to building relationships and collaboration and communication.
Absolutely. All right, so we have lots of ideas that are coming in. So we're going to leave this poll open. And what I'm going to do is for the final slide set, there's already a copy in the collaborative notes. But what I'll do is I will update that slide set with the results of this poll. So Beth, unless there's something else you want to say about this, I think we can move forward. Is there anything else you want to add or say about the poll results?
No, I think the link that Livia shared in the chat, yes, that's she found it. Great.
Okay,
thank you.
Awesome. Yes, thank you for that. All right. So the poll is still open, and I'm going to post the final results with the updated slide set. And as we do that, I want to share, we want to share a few things about, so there's some data points to help you ground yourself in some of the things we're going to talk about today. And this particular data point is from a survey that the Microsoft research team has done with about 30,000 employees across the globe in different contexts and different sectors. And what they found is that on the employee side, 73% really have this question about commute, right? And so there's a willingness to go into the office, the willingness to work in person, but they want it to really count, right? They want it to really matter, and not just to go in because people think it's a good idea from the leadership perspective, but because there's actually some tangible benefit that we can articulate, that we can actually see. So this is one of the things that we want to pinpoint as we think about challenges and solutions that we're going to be talking about shortly. Beth?
Great. So also from this Microsoft survey that they've been doing regularly through the pandemic, I think the latest update is from March. Many managers still have issues with trusting employees who work remotely. Maybe raise your hand if you're experiencing that. 87% of workers report that they're performing just fine, but only 12% of their bosses, leaders, or managers say they have full confidence that their team is productive. And so this disconnect has been dubbed productivity paranoia. So put that in your new terms for 2023. It's the idea that even if your staff is putting in the hours, and they are, bosses won't believe it unless they can see it, to see you at your screen working. And this is really more about a trust deficit. So the problem is that, employees are working more than ever, more hours than ever. We've kind of normalized overworking we started that at the beginning of the pandemic when everything was shut down, and that has continued. And then there's other Microsoft data that shows the number of meetings per week has increased by 153% since the pandemic. And 42% of employees say they multitask during their work meetings, which, causes this extra stress and pressure and this feeling that you have to prove that you're productive. Those factors make hybrid work stressful for all of us. And this isn't sustainable. So managers and bosses, and even if we've internalized this, we need to reframe how we assess productivity, because it's not about measuring time spent in front of the screen or time spent typing, but it's really about thinking about our outcomes and our deliverables. And that's a whole kind of reframing that we need to do to encourage well-being in a hybrid situation.
Absolutely. And I think connected to this is another data point from that set of Microsoft data that talks about collaboration and digital overload, which I referred to earlier. And this is that we are in many ways trying to fill the gap that we might have missed by being in person, right? And I think many of us are trying to overcorrect, right? We're trying to bridge that trust gap, or we're trying to bridge that paranoia gap that Beth was talking about a few moments ago. And the result of that is that, again, we're spending more time in front of our screens. We are duct taping together many tools. A lot of those tools are now duplicative, and so we have an opportunity to actually to audit that and to see if there's a way that we can streamline those things. But we're using more tools. We're spending more time in front of our screens. We're creating this sense of urgency that everything has to be urgent. Everything has to be a Zoom or Teams meeting. And the result is that we are burning people out, in part because we know that, let's just take screen time, for example, video meetings. We know that the risk there is in terms of our mental and emotional health, in terms of how we are drained, right, and our energy levels as well, in terms of the impact on us and our ability to be able to focus and pay attention over sustained periods of time when we're sitting in front of screens and having to be on screens in back-to-back meetings. Beth?
Great. Speaking about back-to-back meetings, and this also comes from the Microsoft data. We've created norms around having back-to-back, and I call it back-to-back to back-to-back to back-to-back to back meetings, but without taking a break. And the research, we know, we feel it. It's not good for us, right? But there's actually the Microsoft research that backs this up, among other studies. So they actually use something called EEG caps. And if you look at the slide on the bottom with the person, that's what it is. It's actually measuring brainwave activity and stress detection. And so what they did, they set up two different groups of people to go through 4 meetings each, back to back. Group 1 took breaks, group 2 didn't. And what they found was that the group that did take the break, they had this opportunity to like reset their brain stress activity. The group that didn't take the break, hopefully I just said that correctly, had higher levels of stress. And the reason for this is that the transition from one meeting to the other, what starts to happen if we don't take a break, we start thinking about this next meeting before we've actually closed the meeting that we're in. And this inability to kind of have closure, this creates this feeling of stress. And it's really about like kind of task switching. And if you're doing this all day long and your stress levels are just pumping stress into your system, that's really not good for you, because that can lead to symptoms like lack of concentration, feeling exhausted. And then it can also have some impacts on your physical health. It can raise your blood pressure, and it can make you, and a number of other things, muscle aches and pains, and a number of things that can lead to diseases. Back-to-back meetings without taking a break are a health risk. They're bad. We should change it. And most recently, I think Vu Lee pointed out, I think I had shared this research recently on LinkedIn, and then he wrote an article recently, a blog post this week on the back-to-back meeting revolution with lots of great tips.
Oh, awesome. Yes. And so I think if we can find that, we'll add that to the link or put it in the chat as well. So we're gonna, now that we've done a level set, right? We've talked about challenges, we've talked about a little bit of framework and some data. What we're gonna do is talk about strategies. And this is an opportunity where we actually wanna hear from you as well. So we're gonna share some strategies that we think are really pressing and important and useful. And then we would love for you to add what you have to that list. And so as we do that, I have an invitation for you, which is to recognize that you might hear things that might be familiar, you might hear things that sound obvious or intuitive for you. And if that is a thought that you're having, the invitation is for you to pause and to really consider whether it's something that you're actively putting into practice for yourself and your team, if you know it could be beneficial. And if not, to really ask yourself what might be getting in your way, because something that might seem like common sense isn't always common practice. And so it makes sense for us to explore what might be getting in our way of putting those things into practice. So with that being said, Beth, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Meico. So we're really talking about workplace culture, and workplace culture can be boiled down to it's the way we do things around here, right? And if you've gone from one workplace and started a new job someplace else, and the cultures are different, people do work together in different ways, different styles. So your organization's culture existed way before there was hybrid work, and it doesn't go away just because you've changed the location or because you're behind a screen. We used to joke in the old days, in the old days of online community, that if you're, when we're talking about putting board meetings online, some people would say, oh, well, put them online and they'll be amazing. But it was kind of like, well, if your board meeting was dysfunctional offline, it's going to be dysfunctional online. So it really doesn't matter, like your environment, your work culture prevails. So what keeps us going and what keeps us connected is our workplace culture, whether we're virtual, in person, or both. And there are different components of workplace culture. They're right there on the chart: purpose, values, behaviors, recognition, rituals, and cues. And these are all the things we need to think about infusing well-being into. One of the biggest causes of stress is when our stated values, what we say as an organization is most important, doesn't actually align with our behaviors. So like one example might be, and we hear this all the time, Meico and myself, when organizational leaders say they care about workplace well-being and want to incorporate breaks between meetings, but the behavior doesn't change. We still have this endless back-to-back meetings. Or when team leaders say, don't work after hours, take time for yourself, work-life balance, but yet they're sending out work-related emails after hours, in the evenings and on the weekends. So some things we want to keep in mind that's really important for hybrid work is, how does our hybrid or virtual environment facilitate communication, effective communication, such as feedback, inclusion, conflict management, decision-making, all of that good stuff? We really want to pay attention to that. And I will say, Meico and I have been talking about workplace culture for a long time, and it's not where we change our workplace culture, wave a magic wand and have it change. It doesn't work like that. It requires a lot of intention, a lot of practice, accountability, and I would also add patience. So
yes, absolutely.
Great.
And so building onto that, I want to share something that I call your rules of engagement, and particularly now an opportunity to update. Actually, Beth, you're going to talk about this.
No, I didn't want to interrupt.
I always forget because
I know. But you know what? I'll say a few things and you can make it better, right? It's always fun to present with somebody. We both know each other's content really well. We both know this content, so it's easy for us to lapse into that. So having rules of engagement, and this covers things like expectations around response times and deadlines and how you communicate, is a really important piece of this workplace culture. So it's important to have rules of engagement. Some of you may already have this in place even before the pandemic, but it's really important now to really think about your rules of engagement and how they can support and encourage and sustain well-being, especially in the hybrid context. So Meico talked at the beginning about the uncertainty that we're all facing, but we want to build our capacity to really deal with that. And the best way to do that is not to make assumptions, right? But to really, we say assumptions make an ass of you and me, but we really want to ask people and be proactive around our communication. Don't just assume somebody knows, or somebody knows where to find that file, or somebody got the message, in the chat. We really want to be proactive. So it's things like clarifying on your team or within your organization, when will people be available for work? When is that non-screen, screen-free time? When is their focus time, when we're actually going to get work done and not be in meetings? What's the best way to reach out and communicate to each other when something's urgent? And then not just urgent, but really, really, an emergency, if you will, versus when it's not urgent. And how soon should we expect a response time? It's really, really easy to create a norm around immediate response, and not everything needs an immediate response. And in fact, that can be a really bad way to up your stress levels during work, is everything has to be immediate. So things to add. what times or days you're working in the office versus remotely. And if you're working from home, what are your hours? And also what shared tools. It's always really good to think about your shared tool stack and to evaluate that and to incorporate your lessons learned. Sometimes collaboration tools can make more work for people, right? Or they're just not the right fit for your workplace culture. So don't be afraid to, do a seasonal review. It's springtime, do some spring cleaning. It's also really good to be cleaning up things and cleaning up files. There's lots of different ways that you can communicate with your team that let people that can signal when you're like deeply focusing on a task or when you're away from your desk. And those are things like having a shared team calendar of where, when people are in the office or out. Spell it out in your out of office message on your email. Or another trick and is getting everybody on your team to use those status updates that we have on Teams or on Slack. I know on Teams it's green is I'm here, I can be interrupted. Yellow is I'm away from my desk, and red is I'm in a meeting or I'm trying to concentrate. And if you can make that a norm within your team and have everybody respect that and follow that, that can really help with improving your team's overall well-being.
Awesome. And so I think that
Did I get it right, Meico?
Yeah, so that was a very awesome overview of that. And one thing I will add to bolster that is that your rules of engagement might change or shift based on the season of life and work that you find yourself in. So you don't have to feel like just because you've established a certain set of norms or rules of engagement for now, that you can't change or evolve those things. So it's important that you and your team are just checking in on those things on an ongoing basis, and you're making adjustments as you need to, and not being rigid and inflexible.
That's so important, Meico, on that rigidity, flexibility. I know I'm working on a project now that is key to an event, and we have norms to respect each other's well-being, but like a week out from the event, with any event, if any of you have produced events, I know the NTEN team knows this, that there is an acceleration of the pace, and you may need to like ping people when the red light is on in Teams, because it is a truly emergency situation.
Yes, and those are things often that you can anticipate ahead of time. So like busy season, for example, you can anticipate that ahead of time and let people know, hey, we're going to have to adjust our rules of engagement. Here's what to expect, and so on.
Yeah, it's the problem is when it becomes the norm.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely. So that the next thing I want to share with you is about this idea, this debate really around whether you should have cameras on or cameras off. This seems to be an ongoing conversation that Beth and I get pulled into, and we're asked to take sides and to referee. And I want to say that the answer really depends on what your intention is and what your needs are for your particular team and organization and your particular meeting or context. And the point here is to recognize a few things. There's research out of Stanford University in particular that shows us in a very tangible way the negative impact that too much time being on screen, particularly in back-to-back meetings, can have on us mentally and emotionally. It can be very draining. It can be counterproductive. And even though for many of us, we think being on screen actually increases engagement and increases people's ability to pay attention, research shows that that's not necessarily the case, and it can actually have the opposite impact if we're not careful. So the invitation here is to really be intentional about whether you need cameras on for a meeting, what the intention is. Is it for part of the meeting? Is it for all of the meeting? Are you having cameras on because you're trying to meet an accessibility goal to help someone who might be hard of hearing and needs to be able to read lips? Thinking clearly about those things, communicating that ahead of time, putting it on the agenda. What is the camera's policy for that particular meeting? Putting it in the meeting invite, and also being clear too, because many of us are working hybrid and remote. What are the norms, particularly if you have different norms around engaging with internal and external stakeholders? What are expectations in terms of people's backgrounds and how people should appear on screen based on who they're meeting with and when they're meeting? So something that we want to be thinking about, not reflexively and thinking it has to be one way or the other, but really being thoughtful about what we need and articulating that need and intention ahead of time. Beth?
So we have mentioned a couple of times already about that a critical piece in the pandemic and kind of our hybrid work has been this loss of social capital. And the reason that people are wanting to go back into the office is not to sit on a Zoom call, but really to connect with their coworkers for that sense of community and just human connection. So and that really dovetails nicely with this need to rebuild social capital. Relationships are so important to getting work done. And this whole shift and disruption during the pandemic has really, created a problems and issues for us to really having that social capital. We have more people feeling disconnected from their organizations. And then there's been a sort of an increase in the loneliness factor if you are working remotely. And just not having enough human contact, if you will. So the takeaway to this is to make sure that your time back in the office or in person is very intentional time for allowing people to connect. And this includes proactive efforts such as connecting via mentoring programs, employee resource groups, or social activities. And sometimes when I say that, I see the wheels turning in some leaders. Well, social activities, that's not work. Well, it is, because what I like to say is that social capital builds relationships, and relationships help us get that work done. And it's also really important to, have that social time, because a lot of us in organizations have hired new people on during the pandemic, and some of them haven't had a chance to really connect with their coworkers face to face. They've only seen them as sort of disembodied faces on a Zoom screen, right? They haven't gotten to connect with them as people. And some nonprofits, I'm hearing a lot more shifting to this model. Instead of trying to do the 3 days in the office, two days remote, or whatever combination, they're going mostly remote, but they're doing quarterly in-person kind of sprints that are meetings for connection time. And it's a combination of this relationship building activities and also maybe strategic planning or addressing topics that really need that in-person time. And you don't want to leave the relationship building to those chance encounters in the break room. Again, I can't say this enough. They're really important and essential to getting work done and being productive. And I know it's counter, because our idea around productivity is checking things off our to-do list, getting stuff done, being at the screen on time, just being productive. But we can't leave the people and the connection and the human piece out of it, because that's essential.
And one thing I'll add to this is that you want to be intentional about in-person. So if you are there, not assuming that the connection is just going to take place if your intention for being in person is actually to have in-person collaboration, but being proactive about scheduling that coffee date, scheduling that meeting, scheduling that huddle, and not assuming that just because you show up, it's going to happen. One of the more common complaints that we hear is that, okay, I want to go into the office and I want to make it meaningful and impactful, but when I show up, there's no one there, right? So one of the ways you can do that is by actually being proactive. Now, it also works in the opposite way. So I can say this as an introvert. You might not want to connect with people, right? And so you might want to go into the office when there's no one when there's no one that's going to be there, and there's a less chance that you might have to bump into someone else. And so maybe you have a chaotic situation at home, and you want to go to the office for peace and quiet and to be able to work and to have that space and time for yourself. And so being intentional about what that is, and not assuming that it's just going to happen, but putting some intention behind it to make it work for you. Beth? Sure.
So this is about being fluent in hybrid communication and collaboration. And in the resources, I call it digital fluidity. And that's really the ability for you and your team to be able to work in a mix of virtual and in person, and become fluent at asynchronous and synchronous work styles. Because I think this is one of the ways that we can get out of this back-to-back meeting stuff, because I think a lot of our meetings, we're doing tasks that we could be doing asynchronously or on our own time. And so that could be things like updates or quick messages versus things that you really need to discuss in person and get on the same page with. So what the assessment has is a lot of different types of communications and collaborations. And it's a sort of a way for you to reflect on, oh, when we're planning this meeting, or I'm doing a job performance review, for example, well, you know, that's maybe not something you would want to do asynchronously. You want to do it in real time because it's an emotionally charged topic. So you want to sort of think through what makes sense that you can let people do on their own time, that can be done flexibly. And that might be giving feedback to a draft document or something. That's not something you need to like take up a time in a real meeting, and in fact, a real-time meeting. So, and meetings are, I think, a really fertile ground. And we're going to talk about this in a moment to really think through what could be asynchronous and what could be synchronous. So for example, you know, before the pandemic, when we party like it's 2009, before the pandemic, meetings would be a lot of reporting and kind of roll call and status updates. But really, I think with given a hybrid way of working and virtual way, we can't really do that. So we really need to design shorter meetings. We call them sync meetings, where we get on the same page, we make decisions or have discussion, and sort of reallocate the reporting and the updates and the presentations to things that people can do on their own time or asynchronously. And that means your meetings can be shorter. The other piece of this is making sure that you can create digital artifacts. And that means having that kind of digital first approach to things. So when there is a meeting, that there's a recording or there's a transcript and that there's slides. And, you know, assume like document your meetings as if that you had to provide documentation for people who weren't there and make that accessible. So then that gives people a more flexible way to work. And all of this leads to better well-being in a hybrid workplace. Back to you, Meico.
Awesome, thank you for that. And one thing I wanted to add, you mentioned syncing, for example, as a way to really make synchronous work a bit more seamless when you actually are meeting in real time. And one thing I wanted to share, there are video tools like Loom and Bonjoro that allow you to send video casts and screencasts ahead of time. And so Beth, you and I have used this in planning for retreats for clients, for example, where instead of us having to have a sync meeting, I will send Beth a video where I'm walking through the agenda. Hey, Beth, this is what we're going to do on day one. Just want to let you know I made this change here. And let me know if you have any questions, right? And so that's one way, particularly if time is limited, we don't have to go back and forth scheduling multiple real-time meetings in order to move the project forward.
Another way to think about it too is what you're talking is the some people aren't even thinking in terms of sync meetings. And so to think about the work sprint when you're planning as it's called punctuated collaboration. And so it's flipped. When we were mostly face-to-face, we had the emphasis on real-time meetings, and then we go away and do our work. And now the equation's been flipped, where we really should have more time on our own, and we get together for briefer synchronous real-time meetings. So we punctuate our collaboration with these real-time meetings that are shorter.
Absolutely. And so with that being said, we have a few more things to cover, but before we do that, we want to hear from you. And so we have another Slido poll here that you can participate in by opening up your camera app on your mobile device and scanning that QR code. And if you're prompted for an event code, hybrid work is that event code. But we want to hear what's one tool or strategy that's working for you right now. 2 to 3 words if you want to put it in using this particular tool. And you can also use a web browser. If you go to slido.com and type in the event code hybrid work, that is another way that you can actually access this as well. And an opportunity for you to share what you have on this particular topic. And that way that we can all learn from one another. And we'll give it a few moments to see what is popping up for us in the chat here. And also with our Slido poll. Let's see if we see any common themes.
Focus time.
Yes, time, focus time, absolutely.
No meeting times, no meeting
Yes,
Fridays,
yes.
time,
No meeting Fridays that are actually no meeting Fridays, right? Like no meeting Fridays that don't turn into catch-up days.
or no,
Absolutely.
or setting quote the norm for no meeting Fridays, but people schedule Friday
Yes,
meetings. Yeah.
exactly. Oh,
And
it's just
that's,
one meeting.
yeah, that's another example where there's the mismatch between the values and behaviors. And you need an accountability um, process, like setting the global sets on your Google or Outlook calendar where nobody can actually schedule a meeting on Friday. That's a little
Yes.
draconian though.
So speaking of this, so Beth, I wonder if it's okay with you that can you talk about briefly how people should use meetings? Because you mentioned like it's probably not the best use of time if people are just giving updates to each other. But so like, what is the alternative? Like how should people use meetings if they're actually going to have the meeting?
To have discussion and make decisions or get on the same page, or to cover a
Hmm.
meeting where there's a sensitive topic that you don't
Hmm.
want to just leave it to a chat or to
Hmm.
an email because that could cause stress.
Yes.
Like if you're
Yes.
giving feedback or something, like one thing with one project I'm working on now, we have to do a bi-weekly status report, and we have a form that we fill out that's in our collaboration channel on Slack, and we know that it's filled out by Thursday afternoon, and then people know to look at it to see what else is done and leave comments if there's questions, and that way we don't have we've knocked out 30 minutes of a team meeting on that. We don't need to do that. But what we do we call it our stand-up verbal meeting, is there's anything in that report where there's like, oh, okay, I'm having trouble completing my task because there's this other piece that's going on and I don't quite understand what's going on and we
Yes.
need to troubleshoot this.
Yes. I think all of those are excellent examples. So it looks like meetings and focus time and flexibility are the biggest things that are standing out for people in terms of tools and strategies. And I've seen a couple of other things in the
I want to
backdrop there,
know,
which, yeah,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt
go
you,
ahead.
but I want to know what Thirsty Thursdays are. I think I need a Thirsty Thursday. It is
Yes.
Thursday.
I don't
Is
know, maybe
that,
that's happy hour.
yeah,
Is
is that
there
a
drinking
happy hour?
involved or is
Yeah.
that tea or coffee? Yeah, curious. Oh, it could be walking your dog to the park. I
Happy
don't know.
hour. All right.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So we're going to keep this poll open again. If folks have more things they want to add, we'll keep it open and we'll add the final version to the updated slide deck at the end for the collaborative notes. But with that, we want to turn our attention to meetings, right? So we've talked about this a little bit, but we want to really hammer home this point because meetings, I don't know about you, Beth, but I think meetings are probably the number one complaint that I hear from clients when they talk about distractions in the workplace, especially during the post-pandemic world. I don't
Yeah,
know about
I've
you, but
been hearing
yeah,
that for decades. It's
yeah.
just gotten worse.
So a fun graphic that I really like. So how many of us have had this experience? Let us know in the chat where you're in a meeting and you realize, oh my God, this first of all, we should not have had this meeting, or this could have just been an email. This could have been just a quick update over Slack. We didn't need to convene everyone and go to the back and forth to try to figure out people's schedules, just to regurgitate something that could have been sent out via email or just posted in Slack for folks to see. And so to this point, one of the things that I really like, there's an op-ed from the New York Times from a while ago, and there's a quote from Octavian Gestache, who talks about meetings as thieves of joy, of productivity, and mental freedom. And when I think about it that way, I think of useless meetings as a form of violence, right? When you think about the research that Beth talked about earlier in terms of the impact of back-to-back meetings on our mental and our emotional health, if you're hosting a useless meeting, then you're contributing to that negative impact. And that can be seen as a form of violence. So for something for you all to think about as food for thought, as you think about how can you be intentional about meetings moving forward coming out of today's conversation. Beth?
Sure. I was just reflecting on I know one thing I've been doing with my team lately, we do set a cadence for regular meetings, but sometimes at the beginning of the week, we might look at, hey, in the next week, there's this meeting. Do we really need this meeting? So before we, sometimes this is a norm around, potentially scheduling them, always asking, do we really need a meeting? But sometimes a meeting will get scheduled. And so there's this look ahead. And it's kind of like, we had this team meeting here and it says it's to talk about this, but I don't think we really need this, do we? And no, we don't. So we take it off. We don't feel like, we don't just go in and meet. And again, I think Meico and I have said this numerous times, meetings, are a health hazard. Over meeting is a health hazard, especially if we're not taking breaks in between. And again, there's I find nothing more stressful than a useless meeting, right? Because then what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to get that other work task done. And I'm going to, sneak off camera and I'm going to try to answer my email. And that's not productive because I'm multitasking. And I find that the most exhausting. So this is a flow chart. It's probably linked in the resources that help you decide whether or not you should have a meeting, yes, no. If we go to the next slide, great. There's kind of a, should we meet? The heck yes, the hell yeah is, we need to build social bonds. We need to make some rapid decisions. There's a very detailed or emotionally complex topic. So we really need to meet to sort it out, or there's some emotionally charged discussions. So those are like, hell yeah. So the hell no's or probably we don't need this meeting, or we need to take this part out of the meeting. If there's no agenda or no clear intention, you don't need to meet. That's a waste of time. Status updates or reporting, as we mentioned, those can be put into forms and done virtually. Feedback requests and approvals, and these is specifically for like if you're collaborating on a document, and use the commenting. That's a really great way of using asynchronous time where you don't have to go through it in a meeting, or sometimes getting a quick approval on something that doesn't require a whole meeting. And key decision. Oh, if a key decision maker can't make the meeting and they're pivotal to making the meeting effective, don't meet anyway. That's not a good plan. So those are some instances where that'll help you decide, yes, we should meet, or no, we shouldn't.
Absolutely. And on this point, in terms of if you're going to have a meeting, you decide that it's actually the best thing to do that, to meet synchronously, to meet in real time, whether it's hybrid, remote, or in person, you want to be clear about the basics, right? So who needs to be there, right? Having the right folks there, including the folks that are the pivotal decision makers, being clear about what you're meeting about, right? What problem are you solving? What question are you answering? What sensitive topic are you discussing? And what's the action step that you're hoping to get out of that, right? Where are you going to have it? And being mindful of the fact that particularly if you have a remote meeting or a hybrid meeting, that you are taking into account equity in terms of how people are meeting, and that you're meeting any accessibility issues, and then thinking intelligently and mindfully about the length of the meeting. For many of us, we default to the half hour or the hour-long format, but really thinking about whether or not you actually need that. I forget the person it's attributed to, but there's simply this law that says that if you are given enough time, that you will fill that time, right? And so if you give people an hour or 2 hours, then they're going to fill that hour or 2 hours with things to talk about, even though you don't necessarily need that entire full length of time. So something for you to be thinking about as you think about your meetings. Something else to think about, again, as Beth talked about earlier with the science behind the impact of back-to-back meetings on our brains, on our mental, emotional, and our physical well-being, is thinking about this concept of your Zoom number. And this applies to meetings, whether they are virtual meetings, hybrid meetings, or in-person meetings. But the idea is that, similar to the sleep number bed that many of you might be familiar with, right? The sleep number bed, essentially you have a number that indicates your level of firmness that you prefer for the mattress. Your partner might have a different number, but you can sleep in the same bed and you all make it work together, right? Similarly, with the Zoom number concept, the idea is that as an individual and then as a team, you all are coming together, you're thinking about how many meetings in terms of max is too many before it becomes counterproductive, right? Counterproductive in the sense that you're not able to be really present for the meeting, right? You're not able to be fully engaged for the meeting, thinking a lot about that and arriving at what that needs to look like, recognizing that this might change based on the season of life and work that you find yourself in, but simply being aware of how many meetings you have on the calendar, how many meetings as a team and as an organization you're holding, lining that up with the research that we've talked about previously, and making a concerted effort to think about, okay, how can we have fewer meetings, and how can we have the meetings that we do have, how can we make those actually count more? Beth?
Great. And building on what Meico just said, a lot of us set up recurring meetings. I don't know. I know my team does. And it's actually really efficient because it eliminates a lot of the back and forth scheduling, which also can weigh on you. But sometimes when we do that, we don't necessarily need all of those recurring meetings. It's called meeting cadence, like how often do we need to meet and how long do we need to meet? And sometimes we get our calendars cluttered with recurring meetings. So it's really good every quarter. It's spring, do some spring cleaning. One dramatic thing you can do, and people always go, oh, you really? is to maybe at the beginning of the year to remove them all and then put them back selectively, because you might realize that you didn't really need this recurring meeting. You're just meeting because you're meeting and not really around a particular goal. The accordion that's there, if you listen to the accordion in Argentinian music, it either goes really slow and stretches things out, or else it can go really fast and a fast beat like a tango. That's how it works. So I always like to apply the accordion method to meetings. Sometimes we can get through our agenda faster, and it's okay to give back that time. And sometimes we need to do longer meetings. That always happens when we've overstuffed our agenda, when we have this kind of wishful thinking that we're going to get through all of this stuff. And I have been totally guilty of that. I could throw into an agenda, I used to, enough for like 3-hour meeting. So really be honest with yourself and start to put times to each of the topics and figure out okay, there's too much here for a 50-minute meeting. So these couple of things are not totally the priority right now. I'm going to push them back, push them ahead to the next week. And your meetings will be less cluttered. You will then also be able to observe the 10-minute break that we've been talking about. And the goal is here to just have some spaciousness, so you're not under that pressure.
Absolutely.
Back to you, Meico.
And to really tie this all together, we also want to be focused on making things digitally inclusive, right? So particularly for hybrid and for remote meetings, making sure that you're using platforms and tools that level the playing field, that make it easy for folks, no matter how they're joining, to participate and actually get the most out of the meeting. So if you're looking at a real-time agenda, for example, using a collaborative tool like Google Docs or the equivalent from Microsoft to make that happen. There are tools like Miro and Slido that allow you to do interactive polling and to do interactive work together, and particularly if you're problem solving on something that's really complex. Microsoft Teams and Zoom and some other tools that are out there are also available to help you to do that. And then for folks that are particularly interested in the hybrid setup, there are cameras like the OWL camera you see there on the left that can be really helpful in terms of helping the folks that are joining remotely, being able to connect with the folks that might be gathered together in a physical space. And so we've seen lots of tools like that become more popular, and there are even more. I think since we've done put together this presentation, new things that are out there that are available for folks that are interested in having people meet and connect, but being able to do it in a way that allows people, regardless of how they're connecting, to have an equitable level of access and be able to engage in a similar way.
Great. And just two more. I'm not muted. Okay. Just two more quick technical tools that can help you. And you can do, this first one is either for you individually, or if you have control of your organization's calendar, calendar software, and if you had discussion around it, you can actually reset the defaults so they're not 60 minutes on the hour meetings as the default. You can actually set them to 50 minutes, right? Or if you have a default of 30 minutes, you can actually set it to be a 25-minute or a 20-minute meeting instead. And so For Google, there's a checkbox that says speedy meeting, and it's really easy to do that. And Outlook also does the same for shorten appointments and meetings feature. The other tool is Otter AI, which is a voice to text transcription tool. And it's basically an AI note taker, and it's really helpful. That can free you from taking notes during the meetings. So those are just a couple of tech tips to improve your meetings.
Awesome. And so with that, we are wrapping up today's session. And so with that, we have one final Slido poll, and we would love to hear from you. One new tool or strategy that you are interested in putting into practice, or one new tool or strategy that you're going to recommit to. Maybe it's something that you had tried before, but you didn't follow through on. We would love to see if folks want to use, again, the camera app on the camera app on your phone to scan and to open up the poll. And then we're going to share the resources slide one more time as we wrap up. And if we have time, we can take questions that folks might have. So we're going to give folks a few moments for this, and fewer and shorter meetings.
And while you're doing that, if you could, let's let it populate. Somebody else just wanted to see the slide tool one more time. Great, the resource one. Give her a chance to capture that if that's the slide you're referring to.
And this is also in the collaborative notes as well.
Great. And we can pop back to the work cloud. Great.
All right. The update form, it's such a basic thing that I think can make a really big difference. And I saw that one person, I think it was Danielle, mentioned something that I thought was really cool, and I hope that she might add an example in the collaborative notes. But she said she uses Google Sheets to create an agenda, and she assigns a time slot for each agenda item, and it automatically recalculates based on the number of items that are added to the agenda.
Right, and you can actually set up Excel formulas to automatically change the times. We use those for run of shows for events, but I haven't thought about actually doing it for a meeting.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, Jenna, it's Otter AI.
Otter AI.
That's the tool. Oops.
Zoom meeting number. Always a popular one.
Yes. All right. So I am mindful of the time that we have, and I know that we're out of time, and I know that I want to keep the folks that are hosting on schedule. So if we have time for questions, we'll stick around for questions, but if not, you can drop those into collaborative notes. Our contact information is there. You can also reach out to us directly. I'm going to turn it back over to our host. And if we have time for questions, we'll stick around. And if not, we'll connect with you another way.
Time is up. So I'm going to go ahead and end it.
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much, Stacey.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Very awesome session. I really enjoyed listening to that one.
Awesome. All right. Bye, everyone.